a baby appears at Jimin's doorstep with a letter bearing Jungkook's name. A forgotten secret awakens, changing every life forever. "Don't let anyone take him. Promise me." The desperate cry shattered the silence just as Jimin flung open his front door, his heartbeat pounding louder than the thunder rolling across the midnight sky. Rain lashed against the porch, soaking everything in sight, yet the tiny bundle resting on the wooden steps remained strangely untouched beneath a thick lavender blanket. The baby's fragile cries pierced through the storm, trembling with helplessness, and Jimin froze for a heartbeat before instinct overwhelmed every rational thought. He dropped to his knees, lifting the infant carefully into his trembling arms. The child could not have been more than a few months old. Warm skin, flushed cheeks, and tiny fingers instinctively wrapped around Jimin's thumb as though they had been waiting for him all along. "Who left you here?" he whispered, scanning the empty street. Streetlights flickered through the rain, revealing nothing except deserted sidewalks and puddles reflecting flashes of lightning. Whoever had abandoned the child had vanished without leaving footprints behind. As Jimin pulled the blanket closer around the baby, something stiff brushed against his hand. Hidden beneath the folds of soft fabric was a sealed ivory envelope tied with a faded purple ribbon. Water had barely touched it despite the relentless storm. His chest tightened with unease as he untied the ribbon and unfolded the single sheet inside. The handwriting was elegant yet visibly hurried, as though every word had been written with shaking hands. Only one sentence appeared on the page. "If you want this child to survive, find Jungkook before the truth finds you." Jimin's breathing stopped. The name struck him like a forgotten nightmare suddenly returning in vivid color. Jungkook. A name he had spent years trying to erase from every corner of his memory. A name that carried laughter, betrayal, impossible promises, and a goodbye that had never truly ended. He stared at the sleeping infant again, searching the tiny face for impossible answers. The baby's eyes slowly opened, revealing deep dark irises that reflected the porch light with an uncanny familiarity. Something inside Jimin shifted. Those eyes reminded him of someone he had once trusted more than himself. His pulse raced as memories surfaced without permission. Years earlier, he and Jungkook had stood beneath cherry blossoms outside an old university library, laughing over ridiculous dreams about changing the world. Jungkook had always believed every mystery deserved an answer, every abandoned soul deserved a home, and every promise had to be kept regardless of the cost. Jimin had admired that unwavering conviction, even while fearing it would someday destroy them both. That fear became reality when Jungkook disappeared without explanation. No farewell, no phone call, no message, just silence that stretched across years until Jimin forced himself to believe the friendship belonged to another lifetime. Yet now Jungkook's name had returned in the most impossible way imaginable, wrapped around an abandoned child delivered to his doorstep during the fiercest storm of the year. The baby whimpered softly, breaking Jimin's spiraling thoughts. He carried the child inside, closing the heavy wooden door against the rain. Warm light filled the living room, revealing books stacked neatly across shelves, half-finished paintings leaning against the walls, and a quiet loneliness that had settled into the house ever since he chose a life of isolation. Jimin gently placed the baby on the sofa, wrapping another blanket around the tiny body before searching online for emergency pediatric advice. He warmed a bottle of formula he happened to keep after occasionally volunteering at a neighborhood shelter for abandoned children. The infant drank hungrily, tiny hands gripping the bottle with surprising determination. Watching the child eat stirred something painfully unfamiliar inside Jimin. He had convinced himself years ago that his life was meant to remain solitary. Relationships disappeared, people left, promises broke, solitude hurt less than hope. Yet this tiny stranger had entered his home, and within minutes transformed silence into purpose. While changing the baby's soaked blanket, another discovery sent chills racing across his spine. Around the infant's neck hung a delicate silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. Jimin's fingers trembled as he recognized the design immediately. He owned the exact same pendant. Years ago, Jungkook had purchased 2 identical necklaces from an elderly craftsman during a trip to a coastal village. "So we never lose our way back to each other," Jungkook had joked while placing one around Jimin's neck. Jimin had hidden his pendant away after Jungkook vanished, unable to bear the memories attached to it. Yet here was its twin, resting against the chest of an abandoned baby. Coincidence suddenly felt impossible. Someone wanted Jimin to connect these pieces. Someone knew everything about his past. Somewhere beyond the rain, invisible eyes might already be watching the house. Jimin walked toward the front window and carefully parted the curtain. Across the street, beneath the dim glow of a dying street lamp, a black sedan sat motionless. Its engine idled quietly. The windshield was too dark to reveal the driver, but the vehicle had definitely not been there earlier that evening. The baby suddenly laughed, an innocent, cheerful sound completely at odds with the growing dread filling the room. Jimin looked back at the child, then once more toward the mysterious car waiting outside, realizing with quiet certainty that the peaceful life he had spent years rebuilding had ended the moment he opened his front door to answer a cry in the storm. Jimin locked every door and switched off the lights facing the street, leaving only the warm glow of a small lamp in the living room. The silence that followed felt heavier than the storm outside. Every creak of the old wooden floor sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind scraping branches against the windows resembled fingernails searching for a way inside. He stood motionless behind the curtain, watching the black sedan across the street. Minutes passed. The engine continued to idle, its headlights dark, its driver invisible. Whoever sat inside possessed extraordinary patience. The baby finished drinking and let out a tiny yawn before drifting peacefully to sleep, completely unaware that his arrival had shattered the fragile order of another person's life. Jimin carefully placed him in a small portable crib he had borrowed months ago from the community shelter for volunteer work. As he tucked the blanket around the infant, he noticed something embroidered into one corner of the lavender fabric. A single letter. Kate. Not printed. Hand-stitched. The careful stitches were uneven, as though someone had sewn them in great haste, yet every thread carried remarkable precision. Jimin gently traced the embroidery with his fingertips. Was it the baby's initial, or was it another message pointing toward Jungkook? His thoughts were interrupted by the vibration of his phone. Unknown number. He hesitated before answering. Hello. Only silence greeted him. Then came the faint sound of a child humming. Not crying. Humming. The melody was hauntingly familiar. Jimin's face slowly drained of color. Years ago, during endless nights studying for university exams, Jungkook had absent-mindedly hummed that exact tune whenever he concentrated. He had claimed his grandmother used to sing it before bedtime. No recording of the melody existed. It belonged only to their shared memories. Who's there? Jimin demanded. A woman's voice finally whispered through the speaker. He found you sooner than I expected. The line went dead. Jimin immediately called back. The number no longer existed. His heartbeat thundered inside his chest. Someone knew about the melody. Someone knew about Jungkook. Someone knew exactly where Jimin lived. He rushed back to the window. The black sedan was gone. Only empty rain-soaked pavement remained. The disappearance frightened him even more than its presence. Morning arrived beneath heavy grey clouds. The storm had passed, but unease lingered in every corner of the house. Jimin barely slept. Whenever exhaustion threatened to overcome him, he imagined unfamiliar eyes watching through the darkness. The baby awoke with an unexpected smile. Unlike the desperate cries from the previous night, he now seemed remarkably calm. He laughed at sunlight spilling through the curtains and reached toward floating dust particles dancing in the air. His innocent curiosity contrasted painfully with the growing mystery surrounding him. Jimin prepared another bottle before calling nearby hospitals, orphanages and police stations. No missing infant had been reported. No family searching. No emergency alerts. Officially, the child did not exist. That answer disturbed him far more than any confirmation could have. As he ended another unsuccessful phone call, someone knocked on the front door. 3 slow knocks. Perfectly spaced. Jimin froze. No one ever visited without calling first. He cautiously approached the entrance and looked through the peephole. An elderly mail carrier stood outside, holding a small brown package. Relief washed briefly across him before he opened the door. I don't remember ordering anything, Jimin said. The mail carrier frowned. You didn't. What do you mean? It has no shipping label. Someone handed it to me 5 minutes ago and paid cash to make sure only you received it. Jimin accepted the package. The old man looked unusually uneasy. I've delivered mail for 32 years, he murmured quietly. I've never seen someone disappear that fast. What did the person look like? The mail carrier searched his memory. Tall, woman or man? I honestly couldn't tell. What about their face? They wore a hood. Before Jimin could ask another question, the elderly man excused himself and walked quickly toward his van, repeatedly glancing over his shoulder. Jimin closed the door. The package was surprisingly light. Inside rested an old cassette tape. A cassette. Not a flash drive. Not a memory card. Alongside it lay a handwritten note. Play this alone, never let the child hear it. His breathing became shallow. Who still used cassette tapes? After several moments of searching through dusty storage boxes in the attic, he found an old cassette player left behind by his father years earlier. With trembling hands, he inserted the tape. Static crackled. Several long seconds passed. Then a familiar male voice filled the room. Jimin, if you're hearing this, everything has already gone terribly wrong. Jimin's knees nearly gave out. It was Jungkook. Older, more exhausted, but unmistakably Jungkook. I don't know how much time I have, the recording continued. If the baby reached you, then they failed to stop her. That means she's braver than either of us ever imagined. Jimin leaned closer, hardly breathing. I wanted to tell you the truth years ago, but the truth became too dangerous. They were watching us long before we realized it. A loud crash echoed on the recording, followed by hurried footsteps. Jungkook's breathing grew ragged. They're coming. The tape briefly distorted before his voice returned, softer now. Whatever happens, don't believe the letter. The recording suddenly stopped. The cassette player clicked. Silence. Jimin stared at the machine in disbelief. Don't believe the letter. Which letter? The one inside the blanket. Or another letter he had not yet found. At that exact moment, the baby began crying upstairs. Not ordinary crying. Terrified screaming. Jimin sprinted toward the nursery 2 steps at a time. When he burst through the door, the room was empty of intruders. The baby pointed his tiny finger toward the bedroom window. The curtains swayed gently. The window was open. Rainwater dripped onto the wooden floor. And resting on the windowsill was a single fresh white lily, its petals glistening with morning dew, as though someone had silently entered the room while Jungkook's recorded voice played downstairs. The white lily trembled in the morning breeze as Jimin stepped toward the open window, every instinct warning him that someone had been inside the room only moments earlier. The flower was impossibly fresh, untouched by the rain that still clung to the rooftops outside. Its delicate fragrance spread through the nursery, replacing the familiar scent of baby powder with something strangely nostalgic. Jimin gently lifted the flower. Tied around its stem was an impossibly thin silver thread, nearly invisible beneath the petals. Attached to the thread hung a tiny folded piece of paper no larger than his thumbnail. His fingers hesitated before unfolding it. He's closer than you think. Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. The baby slowly stopped crying the instant Jimin picked up the note. Instead, the child stared toward the window with remarkable concentration, almost as though watching someone disappear beyond the garden fence. Jimin rushed outside. The wet grass still bent beneath fresh footprints. One pair. Small. Light. They led across the backyard, toward the narrow forest path behind the house. Without thinking, Jimin followed. Leaves brushed against his shoulders as he hurried beneath dripping trees. The forest was quiet except for birds cautiously returning after the night's storm. Sunlight filtered through the branches, painting shifting patterns across the muddy ground. The footprints continued deeper into the woods before suddenly ending beside an abandoned stone well. Jimin slowed his breathing. The old well had stood there for decades. Children from the neighborhood used to invent ghost stories about it, claiming whispers echoed from its depths every full moon. He approached cautiously. The air surrounding the well felt noticeably colder. Resting on the moss-covered stones was an old leather bracelet. Jimin froze. He knew that bracelet. Years ago, he had given it to Jungkook as a birthday gift after saving money for nearly 3 months. Jungkook had laughed at its simplicity, but wore it every single day, claiming it was luckier than any expensive watch. Jimin picked it up. The leather was worn. Recently worn. Not preserved. Not forgotten. Someone had placed it here deliberately. His heart raced. Jungkook. The name escaped his lips before he realized he had spoken aloud. A voice answered. You're finally saying it again. Jimin spun around. A young woman stood several meters away between the trees. Her long black coat was damp from the rain, and a hood partially concealed her face. She appeared to be in her late 20s, yet exhaustion had carved years into her expression. Most striking of all was the faint scar stretching across her left cheek. You left the baby, Jimin said. She neither confirmed nor denied it. You shouldn't have come here. You know Jungkook. I know what he sacrificed. Jimin stepped closer. Where is he? The woman remained silent. Is he alive? Her eyes filled with unmistakable sorrow. I don't know anymore. Those 5 words struck harder than any direct answer. What does that mean? It means the man you remember disappeared a long time ago. Jimin's voice hardened. Then tell me who is chasing us. She looked toward the surrounding forest before answering. They don't chase people. They collect them. A chill crawled across Jimin's spine. They erase names, histories, families, entire lives. If someone becomes dangerous to their secrets, that person simply disappears. Who are they? I've never learned their real name. She reached into her coat and removed a faded photograph. This is why they wanted Jungkook. Jimin accepted it carefully. The picture showed 5 smiling university students standing in front of an old observatory. Jimin immediately recognized himself and Jungkook. But there were 3 others. A cheerful young woman wearing glasses, a tall athletic man, and someone whose face had been deliberately scratched away. Deep knife marks completely erased the final person's identity. What happened to this picture? I didn't do that. Then who did? They did. Jimin looked closer. The scratched-out figure had one arm resting comfortably around Jungkook's shoulder. Whoever that person was, they had once been extremely close to him. Why erase only one face? Because memories are dangerous. The woman suddenly stiffened. Her eyes darted toward the trees behind Jimin. They found us. Before Jimin could react, she shoved him violently aside. A sharp metallic dart shot through the air exactly where his chest had been. It buried itself into the trunk of a nearby tree. The bark hissed. Smoke rose from the impact. The wood blackened within seconds. Poisoned. The woman grabbed Jimin's wrist. Run. They sprinted through the forest as more darts sliced past them with terrifying precision. None of the attackers spoke. None emerged from the trees. Only brief flashes of black clothing appeared between branches before vanishing again. Jimin's lungs burned. The woman knew every turn of the forest, leading him through narrow paths barely visible beneath tangled roots. They crossed a shallow stream before ducking inside the ruins of an abandoned chapel, hidden beneath climbing vines. Only then did the attack stop. Silence returned. The woman leaned against a cracked stone wall, breathing heavily. They won't enter here. Why? They're afraid. Afraid of what? Instead of answering, she walked toward the altar. Dust covered everything except one object. A wooden box. She opened it carefully. Inside rested dozens of letters. Every envelope bore the same name. Jimin. His breath caught. I never wrote these. No. She looked directly into his eyes. Jungkook did. Jimin stared speechlessly. There are 83 letters. His hands trembled as he reached for the first envelope. 83. He wrote one every month after he disappeared. Then why didn't I receive them? Because someone made sure you never would. Tears threatened to blur Jimin's vision. He gently opened the oldest envelope. The first line shattered the wall he had spent years building around his heart. Dear Jimin, if you're reading this, then I finally found my way back to you. Jimin's fingers refused to move for several long seconds. The paper felt impossibly familiar, carrying the faint scent of cedarwood and old ink. Jungkook had always used the same fountain pen, always folded his letters with meticulous precision, and always left a tiny fingerprint of blue ink near the bottom corner without realizing it. There it was again, a flaw no stranger could have forged. Dear Jimin, if you're reading this, then I finally found my way back to you. If fate has allowed these words to reach your hands, then it means I have either won, or disappeared forever. I hope for the first, but I prepared for the second. Jimin swallowed hard. I know you must hate me for leaving without a single explanation. I deserve that hatred. Every day I imagined you looking at an empty chair where I should have been, wondering whether I chose to abandon you. I didn't. I chose to keep you alive. His vision blurred. The woman remained silent, giving him space to breathe. There are people who don't simply erase evidence. They erase memories, identities, and anyone connected to them. Once I discovered what they were hiding, everyone close to me became a target. You became the greatest weakness they could use against me. Walking away from you was the hardest decision I have ever made. Jimin lowered the letter. So he really wanted to come back. He never stopped trying, the woman whispered. Who are you? She hesitated. My name is Hana. Were you with him? Almost until the end. Jimin searched her face. You loved him. Hana smiled faintly, but there was no bitterness behind it. No. She looked directly at him. He loved only one person. Silence settled between them. Outside, wind whispered through broken stained glass windows, carrying distant echoes of birdsong. Jimin continued reading. If the child reaches you before I do, trust your heart before you trust anyone else. Even my own words may become dangerous because they will force me to write things I don't believe. He stopped. That's why the recording said not to believe the letter. Hana nodded. They watched everything he wrote near the end. So which parts are true? We don't know. Jimin's frustration boiled over. There has to be something we can trust. There is. What? He never lied about you. Before Jimin could answer, a tiny electronic chirp echoed inside the chapel. Both of them froze. The sound came from the baby monitor, clipped to Jimin's jacket. Static crackled. Then came the unmistakable sound of the baby laughing. Jimin frowned. I left him asleep. Another sound followed. Footsteps. Inside his house. His blood ran cold. A man's calm voice spoke through the monitor. He's not here. A second voice answered. Search every room. Jimin gripped the monitor so tightly his knuckles turned white. They're inside my house. Hana immediately gathered the letters. We have to move. What about the baby? You have someone protecting him. Jimin stared at her. I left him alone. No. She met his eyes with complete certainty. You didn't. Before he could ask another question, the monitor crackled again. A soft male voice began humming. The same lullaby. Jimin closed his eyes. Jungkook. Hana's expression changed instantly. He wouldn't risk that. But that's his voice. Exactly. She grabbed the monitor. It's a recording. The humming stopped. One of the intruders spoke again. The child is gone. Another answered. So is the necklace. Silence. Then the first voice laughed quietly. Good. Jimin frowned. Good. They never wanted the baby. They wanted the pendant, Hana whispered. A terrible realization spread across both their faces. The crescent moon necklace. The twin pendant Jungkook had once owned. It had never been jewelry. It had been hiding something. Jimin instinctively reached into his pocket. The matching pendant he had worn years ago was still there. He had begun carrying it again after finding its twin around the baby's neck. Carefully, he examined both pendants side by side. They looked identical, until he noticed something. Tiny engraved lines ran around their edges. Not decorative. Coordinates. Extremely small numbers etched into the silver. Hana leaned closer. I've never seen that before. Neither had Jimin's. He aligned the two pendants together. A faint click echoed. The crescent moons locked into a perfect circle. Something inside shifted. A hidden compartment opened. Nestled within was an impossibly thin memory card. Neither of them spoke. Jimin removed it carefully. What could be on this? Hana's face turned pale. Whatever Jungkook believed was worth sacrificing his entire life to protect. Jimin slipped the card safely into his wallet. We're going home. It's dangerous. I knows. They're probably still there. I knows. They'll expect you. I knows. Hana studied him for a long moment before giving a slow nod. For the first time. What? You sound exactly like him. They left the ruined chapel as afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds. The forest looked peaceful again, as though no pursuit had ever taken place, yet every rustling leaf felt like hidden eyes following their movements. When Jimin's house finally came into view from the hill, both of them stopped walking. The front door stood wide open. Police cars surrounded the property. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze. Neighbors gathered silently along the sidewalk. An ambulance waited with its rear doors open. Jimin's heart nearly stopped. Without waiting for Hana, he ran toward the house. A police officer tried to stop him. Sir, you can't enter. That's my home. The officer's expression changed. Are you Park Jimin? Yes. The officer hesitated before speaking. We found someone inside. Jimin's breathing became shallow. Who's? The officer looked back toward the house. He was unconscious. Jimin could barely force the next words from his lips. Is it the baby? The officer slowly shook his head. No's. Then whose? The officer's voice dropped almost to a whisper. He had no identification. A paramedic emerged from the house, pushing a stretcher toward the ambulance. The unconscious man's face was partly hidden beneath an oxygen mask. As the stretcher rolled past, a hand slipped from beneath the blanket. Around its wrist was a worn leather bracelet. The matching bracelet. The one Jimin had found only an hour earlier beside the abandoned well. Jimin's legs nearly gave way beneath him. The leather bracelet hanging loosely from the unconscious man's wrist was identical to the one he had found beside the abandoned well, except this one bore years of wear. The stitching had frayed in the exact places where Jungkook used to absent-mindedly rub his thumb whenever he was anxious. It was impossible. There could not be two bracelets with the same scratches, the same faded initials burned into the inside leather. Move. Jimin pushed past the stunned officer and rushed toward the stretcher. Wait. A paramedic stepped in front of him. Sir, you can't interfere with medical treatment. Jimin's voice shook. I just need to see his face. The patient suffered severe head trauma. Please. The paramedic hesitated before carefully lifting the edge of the oxygen mask, just enough for Jimin to see. Time seemed to stop. It was Jungkook. Older. Thinner. His jawline had become sharper, and a faint scar crossed his right eyebrow, but there was no mistaking those familiar features. Jimin's chest tightened so violently that he struggled to breathe. Jungkook. His voice was barely audible. The unconscious man did not respond. His eyelashes remained still. His breathing was shallow beneath the mask. A monitor attached to the stretcher emitted slow, steady beeps. The years between them disappeared in an instant, replaced by memories of shared laughter, late-night conversations, and promises spoken beneath a sky full of stars. The ambulance doors slammed shut. "We are taking him to St. Gabriel Medical Center," one paramedic called. Without another thought, Jimin climbed into his car and followed the ambulance through the afternoon traffic. Hana sat silently beside him. Neither of them spoke. Neither knew what words could possibly bridge the distance that 7 years had created. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and polished floors. Doctors moved quickly from room to room, while nurses exchanged clipped conversations. Jimin stood outside the intensive care unit, unable to take his eyes off the glass window. Jungkook lay motionless inside. Machines surrounded him. A bandage wrapped around his forehead. Bruises darkened his arms. The sight filled Jimin with an ache deeper than anger. A physician approached carrying a tablet. "Are you family?" Jimin opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Hana answered instead. "We're close friends." The doctor nodded. "He's physically stable for now." "What happened to him?" Jimin finally managed. "We're still examining him." "Was he attacked?" The doctor hesitated. "There are injuries suggesting prolonged physical stress." "What does that mean?" "He wasn't simply injured today." The doctor's expression grew more serious. "Many of these scars are years old." Jimin looked through the glass again. Years. Someone had hurt Jungkook for years. His hands curled into fists. "Will he wake up?" "We honestly don't know." The doctor lowered his voice. "But there's something unusual." "What?" He keeps repeating one word while unconscious. Jimin's heartbeat quickened. "What word?" The doctor glanced at his notes. "It sounds like..." He checked the spelling again. "Is Orion." Jimin frowned. "I've never heard him say that." Hana suddenly stiffened. "I have." Both men turned toward her. "What is Orion?" Jimin asked. "It wasn't a person." "Then what?" "It was a project." Silence fell. "The last investigation Jungkook ever worked on." "You knew." "He never told me everything." "What kind of project?" Hana looked around the hallway before speaking. "It involved children." Jimin's pulse accelerated. "What children?" "I don't know." "You have to know something." She closed her eyes. "I only know they were disappearing." The words echoed through the hallway. "Disappearing." Jimin immediately thought of the baby sleeping safely at home. Or at least, he hoped the baby was safe. His phone vibrated. Unknown number. Again. He answered immediately. "Hello." A small child's voice whispered. "Papa." Jimin froze. "What?" "Papa." The line disconnected. His entire body went cold. That voice. It sounded exactly like the baby. Less than an hour later, Jimin and Hana returned to the house accompanied by 2 police officers. The yellow tape had been removed. Forensic investigators had already finished their work. Inside, everything appeared untouched. Too untouched. The living room remained exactly as Jimin had left it. The bottle still rested on the coffee table. The blanket lay neatly folded. The portable crib stood beside the sofa. Empty. "The baby's gone," Jimin whispered. One officer frowned. "What baby?" Jimin turned toward him. The infant. There wasn't any infant here. Yes, there was. We searched the entire house. You must have missed. No. The officer's expression was genuine. There was no crib when we arrived. Jimin stared. What? No crib. He slowly looked toward the portable crib, standing only a few feet away. It was still there. Clearly visible. He pointed at it. What about that? The two officers exchanged confused glances. What are you pointing at? Jimin's blood ran cold. The crib. There isn't one. Hana slowly reached forward. Her fingers touched the wooden rail. I can see it. The officers continued staring at empty space. Neither reacted. Neither appeared to be pretending. One officer quietly whispered to the other, I think he's in shock. Jimin backed away. His breathing became uneven. How could two people fail to see something directly in front of them? The baby suddenly giggled. The sound came from the crib. Jimin and Hana heard it clearly. The officers heard nothing. Then the infant slowly opened his eyes. He looked directly at Jimin, raised one tiny hand, and smiled. Around his neck, the crescent moon pendant was gone. Instead, a tiny silver key rested against his chest. Engraved into the key were two simple words. Welcome home. Jimin stood rooted to the floor, unable to tear his eyes away from the tiny silver key resting against the baby's chest. The infant's smile was calm, almost knowing, while the two police officers continued scanning the room with expressions of growing concern. Sir, one officer said gently, there's nothing there. There is, Jimin whispered. You've been through a traumatic day. I'm telling you, he's right here. The officers exchanged another uneasy glance before one of them quietly stepped outside, giving Jimin and Hana a moment alone. As soon as the front door closed, Hana exhaled sharply. They really can't see him. No. Then the protection is working. Jimin turned to her. What protection? The one Jungkook mentioned years ago. You knew about this. Only fragments. She cautiously approached the crib. The baby reached toward her, laughing softly, but when her fingertips came within inches of his tiny hand, an invisible force gently pushed her backward. Hana stumbled. I can't touch him. Jimin stepped forward. The baby immediately wrapped his tiny fingers around Jimin's index finger. Nothing happened. No resistance. No invisible barrier. Only warmth. Only you, Hana murmured. What? Only you can hold him. Jimin carefully lifted the baby into his arms. The child rested his head against Jimin's shoulder as though he had done it 1,000 times before. His heartbeat was slow and peaceful. The silver key glimmered beneath the afternoon sunlight. Jimin examined it closely. Unlike ordinary keys, its teeth formed an intricate spiral pattern. Tiny symbols had been engraved along the shaft, almost microscopic. They aren't decorations, Hana whispered. They're letters. Jimin narrowed his eyes. The symbols slowly formed a sentence. The first door remembers. What does that mean? I don't know. Before either of them could speculate further, Jimin's phone rang again. This time the screen displayed a hospital number. He answered immediately. This is Park Jimin. Mr. Park, a nurse said urgently. The patient regained consciousness. Jimin's heart leaped. Jungkook. Yes, I'm coming. But the hesitation chilled him. He keeps asking for someone named Jimin. I'm on my way. And he insists you must come alone. 20 minutes later, Jimin hurried through the hospital corridor, leaving Hana with the baby at the house despite every instinct telling him not to separate them. Outside Jungkook's room stood two security guards Jimin had never seen before. Not hospital security. Their black suits fit too perfectly. Tiny earpieces disappeared beneath their collars. One guard stopped him. Name: Park Jimin. The guard studied him for several seconds before stepping aside. He's been waiting. Jimin slowly entered the room. The machines continued their rhythmic beeping. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the window. Jungkook sat upright against the pillows. His face remained pale, but his eyes were exactly the same. For several seconds neither man spoke. 7 years of silence filled the room. Finally Jungkook smiled. A tired, fragile smile. I knew you'd come. Jimin's emotions crashed together. Anger, relief, confusion, heartbreak. He crossed the room in 2 quick steps. Without warning, he grabbed Jungkook by the front of his hospital gown. You disappeared. I knows. You let me think you were dead. I knows. You never called. I couldn't. You wrote 83 letters. Jungkook lowered his gaze. I wrote one every month. Why didn't you send them? I did. Jimin blinked. What? I mailed every single one. Silence. They never reached you. Jimin slowly shook his head. Nose. A deep sadness settled over Jungkook's face. They intercepted them. Jimin released his grip. For a long moment neither of them moved. Then Jungkook spoke quietly. I'm sorry. Those 2 words carried 7 years of guilt. Jimin wanted to remain angry. He truly did. But seeing the scars covering Jungkook's arms, the exhaustion in his eyes, and the sincerity in his voice made anger feel unbearably heavy. Instead, he asked the question that had haunted him since the storm. The babies. Jungkook's expression changed instantly. Is he safe? Yes. Relief flooded Jungkook's face. Thank God. Who is he? Jungkook looked directly into Jimin's eyes. He isn't my son. Jimin stared silently. The letter lied. I thought so. But he is. Jungkook hesitated. The last witness. Witness to what? Before Jungkook could answer, every monitor in the room suddenly flickered. The lights dimmed. The heart monitor emitted a shrill burst of static. Then every screen went black. An emergency alarm failed to activate. The entire floor fell eerily silent. Jungkook's face drained of color. They're here. The hospital room door slowly opened. No nurse entered. No doctor. Only an elderly janitor pushing a cleaning cart. He looked ordinary. Grey-haired. Wrinkled face. Gentle smile. He quietly closed the door behind him. Then he spoke without looking at either of them. You've both made this far more complicated than necessary. His voice was calm. Cultured. Dangerously composed. Jungkook slowly reached for the bedside table. The old man noticed. I wouldn't. Jungkook froze. The janitor removed his glasses. His eyes were startlingly pale. Almost silver. You've hidden the child well. Jimin stepped protectively in front of Jungkook. Who are you? The old man smiled. My name no longer matters. He looked directly at Jimin. But yours always did. Jimin felt a strange pressure building inside his head. The room seemed quieter. The air heavier. The old man continued speaking almost gently. You've spent 7 years believing your greatest loss was Jungkook. He tilted his head. It wasn't. What are you talking about? The old man's smile widened. Mr. Park. His next words shattered every certainty Jimin still possessed. You've forgotten your own daughter. Jimin stared at the old man as though the words themselves had torn a hole through reality. My daughter. The sentence echoed inside his mind, refusing to settle into anything that resembled truth. Knows. His voice came out almost inaudible. You're lying. The old man sighed with genuine disappointment. I expected denial. I've never had a daughter. You believe that? Jimin's pulse thundered in his ears. I know that. The old man's pale silver eyes never left him. Memory is a fragile thing, Mr. Park. Remove one thread and an entire life begins to unravel. Jungkook slowly pushed himself upright, despite the pain shooting through his body. Don't listen to him. The old man smiled. I see your loyalty hasn't faded. It never will. Knows. The old man nodded thoughtfully. It never did. Jimin looked from one man to the other. What is he talking about? Jungkook inhaled deeply. There are things I never wanted you to remember. What things? The night everything changed. Jimin frowned. What night? Jungkook closed his eyes. The observatory. The word struck something buried deep inside Jimin's subconscious. A distant image. A cold mountain road. Rain. Someone laughing. A little girl running through tall grass. The memory vanished before he could grasp it. His hand instinctively flew to his temple. Pain exploded behind his eyes. The old man watched calmly. Fragments. He smiled faintly. They always return eventually. What did you do to me? Jimin demanded. I'd. The old man chuckled softly. I merely cleaned up someone else's mistakes. Jungkook's voice became firm. You stole his memories. I preserved his sanity. You erased his life. I saved him from grief. The old man folded his hands behind his back. Perspective is fascinating. Jimin felt dizzy. I don't understand. Jungkook finally looked directly at him. 7 years ago, we weren't investigating corruption. We weren't. No. What were we investigating? Jungkook hesitated. The Orion Foundation. The hospital project. It wasn't a hospital. What was it? It was an experiment. Silence settled over the room. They were studying children with extraordinary neurological abilities. Jimin frowned. What kind of abilities? They remembered things they had never experienced. Jimin stared blankly. They dreamed about places they had never visited. They spoke languages nobody had taught them. They recognized strangers they had supposedly never met. The old man interrupted. They were remarkable. They were children, Jungkook snapped. They were opportunities. They were victims. The old man's smile disappeared. History remembers visionaries as monsters until enough time passes. Jimin barely heard them. Something inside him was shifting. Small flashes. A child's laughter. Tiny shoes beside his front door. Drawing together at a kitchen table. A little voice calling. Papa. His knees weakened. That voice. The phone call. The whisper. Papa. He had heard it before. Long before the mysterious calls. A sharp pain pierced his skull. His breathing became ragged. Another memory surfaced. A little girl handing him a paper flower. Daddy, don't lose it. He remembered smiling. Then, darkness. Running. Sirens. Someone screaming Jungkook's name. Gunfire. The memories scattered once more. Jimin collapsed into a chair, gripping his head. Jungkook reached toward him. Jimin. I'm trying. His voice trembled. I'm trying to remember. The old man remained perfectly calm. You shouldn't. Jimin slowly raised his head. Why? Because some memories destroy the people who recover them. The hospital room suddenly filled with the shrill sound of emergency alarms. Lights flashed red. The door burst open. A nurse rushed inside. Mr. Jun. She stopped abruptly upon seeing the elderly janitor. Her face drained of color. Without a word, she backed out of the room and closed the door again. The old man smiled knowingly. Even fear remembers. Jungkook looked toward Jimin. The memory card. Jimin blinked. The pendant. You still have it. Jimin reached into his wallet and removed the impossibly thin memory card. The old man's pleasant expression finally changed. For the first time, he looked concerned. That belongs to us. Jungkook shook his head. It belongs to the truth. The old man's voice hardened. You don't know what's inside. I do. No. His pale eyes settled on Jimin. He doesn't. Jimin looked down at the tiny card resting in his palm. So tell me. The old man slowly smiled again. It contains your last goodbye. Silence. What? The final recording you ever made for your daughter. Jimin's heart stopped. Before we erased your memories. Jungkook's expression filled with grief. I tried to save both of you. You failed. I saved him. You saved half of him. The old man stepped closer. He begged us. Jimin stared. No. He begged us to erase everything. Jungkook shouted. That's not the whole story. But it is the part he signed. The old man removed a folded document from inside his jacket. He gently unfolded it. Across the bottom appeared a signature. Park Jimin. Authentic. Undeniably authentic. Below it were 7 handwritten words. Erase everything if she cannot be saved. Jimin felt the room spinning. His own handwriting. His own signature. His own decision. Yet he remembered none of it. Tears filled his eyes without warning. If... His voice cracked. If she couldn't be saved. He looked at Jungkook. Did she die? Jungkook's eyes immediately filled with tears. He slowly shook his head. No. Jimin stopped breathing. Then... Jungkook smiled through the tears. She's alive. For the first time in 7 years, hope returned to Jimin's eyes. And for the first time since entering the room, the old man's smile disappeared completely. Hope arrived so suddenly that it hurt. Jimin stared at Jungkook, searching every line of his face for the slightest hint of deception. Instead, he found only exhaustion, regret, and a quiet determination that had survived 7 unforgiving years. She's alive, Jimin whispered. Jungkook nodded once. I've been trying to reach her ever since they separated you. The elderly man let out a soft laugh. You make it sound so noble. It was. You endangered everyone. I protected them. The old man's silver eyes hardened. You prolonged the inevitable. Jimin stepped closer to Jungkook. Where is she? Jungkook opened his mouth to answer. A piercing alarm suddenly echoed through the corridor. Not the hospital alarm. A different sound. 3 short tones. 1 long tone. Jungkook's expression changed instantly. They found the building. The old man smiled again. They've been here all along. Almost simultaneously, every window on the hospital floor shattered inward. Glass exploded across the room like glittering rain. Doctors screamed outside. Patients cried out in panic. Black smoke rolled into the corridor. Through the broken window, ropes descended from the rooftop. Figures dressed entirely in black slid down with impossible precision, landing silently on the ledges outside. Their faces were hidden behind matte masks. No insignias. No names. Only a small silver circle embroidered onto each shoulder. The circle, Jungkook murmured. They finally stopped hiding. One masked figure raised a small cylindrical device. A flash of white light burst through the room. Jimin instinctively shielded his eyes. When his vision cleared, the elderly man was gone. The hospital bed was empty. The heart monitor had been ripped away. Only Jungkook remained. They took him, Jimin said. No. Jungkook struggled to his feet despite the pain. He left. The difference mattered. Someone like him could not simply be captured. He chose when to appear. He chose when to disappear. Jungkook pulled the IV from his arm without hesitation. Blood trickled down his wrist. We have to leave. You can barely stand. I've survived worse. Another explosion shook the building. Ceiling tiles crashed onto the floor. Smoke poured beneath the doorway. Jimin instinctively reached for Jungkook's shoulder, supporting his weight. For the first time in years, they stood side by side again. Not as strangers. Not as broken memories. But as partners. Together they slipped into the corridor. Chaos surrounded them. Nurses guided frightened patients toward emergency stairwells. Medical carts lay overturned. Sprinklers activated overhead, drenching everything in cold water. The electricity flickered. One masked attacker appeared at the far end of the hallway. He carried no firearms, only a slim metallic baton. The attacker sprinted forward with astonishing speed. Jimin barely had time to react. Before he could move, Jungkook stepped between them. Years of captivity had not erased his instincts. He caught the attacker's wrist, twisted sharply. The baton clattered across the floor. The masked figure struck again. Jungkook blocked the blow with his forearm before driving his elbow into the attacker's chest. The man staggered backward. Jimin picked up the fallen baton. Another attacker emerged. Then another. 3 against 2. Jungkook looked over his shoulder. Take the stairs. What about you? I'll follow. I'm not leaving you again. For a brief moment, Jungkook smiled. You finally learned. Together they moved as though the lost years had never existed. Jimin swung the baton, forcing one attacker backward. Jungkook disarmed another with practiced efficiency despite his injuries. Neither spoke. They no longer needed to. Their trust, buried beneath years of silence, returned almost instinctively. They reached the emergency stairwell. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind them. Descending 10 flights became a race against time. Smoke seeped into the stairwell. Sirens wailed outside. By the time they reached the underground parking garage, both men were breathing heavily. Rows of abandoned vehicles stretched into the shadows. Emergency lights painted everything in pulsing red. A familiar voice echoed through the darkness. I knew you'd make it. Hana stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. She wasn't alone. She held the baby safely in her arms. The infant looked perfectly calm, as though the chaos above had never existed. Relief washed across Jungkook's face. You found them. I never lost them. The baby reached toward Jungkook. Tiny fingers opened and closed excitedly. Jungkook gently touched the child's hand. You're safe. The baby laughed. Around his neck, the small silver key shimmered once again. This time, however, something was different. A faint blue light pulsed from inside the engraved symbols. Jimin noticed first. The key. Hana lowered her gaze. It's reacting. To what? Before anyone answered, the key emitted a soft clicking sound. Its spiral teeth slowly unfolded like the petals of a flower. Hidden inside was another tiny object. Not another key. Not a message. A crystal chip no larger than a fingernail. Jungkook's eyes widened. I've never seen that. Hana carefully removed the tiny crystal. Numbers immediately appeared inside it, glowing faintly beneath the garage lights. Coordinates. Jimin recognized the location almost instantly. No. Jungkook looked at him. What is it? I know this place. You do. Jimin nodded slowly. My parents used to take me there every summer. Where's? Jimin swallowed. The old lighthouse on Crescent Island. His breathing became uneven. Another memory surfaced. A little girl running barefoot across the beach. Golden sunlight. Her laughter carried by the ocean breeze. She turned toward him, smiling. Daddy, hurry. The memory lasted longer this time. He could almost see her face. Almost. Then it dissolved once again. Tears filled his eyes. Jungkook placed a hand on his shoulder. That's where she is. Jimin looked at him in disbelief. You know. I've always known. Then why didn't you bring me there? Because until today. Jungkook glanced toward the glowing crystal. They were waiting for you to remember. Silence settled over the underground garage. Outside, distant sirens continued to echo across the city. Jimin looked down at the baby sleeping peacefully in Hana's arms. Then at the glowing coordinates. Then at Jungkook. For the first time since opening his front door on that stormy night, every scattered clue seemed to point toward a single destination. Not another mystery. Not another trap. A lighthouse standing alone at the edge of the sea. And somewhere beyond its weathered walls waited the little girl whose existence had been stolen from Jimin's memory, but never erased from his heart. Night had already fallen by the time Jimin, Jungkook, Hana and the baby reached the abandoned harbour. Thick fog drifted across the silent docks, swallowing the old fishing boats that rocked gently against weathered wooden piers. The salty air carried the scent of the sea, mixed with rust and rain-soaked timber. Somewhere in the darkness, a lonely foghorn echoed across the water, its mournful cry sounding less like a warning and more like a memory calling someone home. The lighthouse on Crescent Island stood in the distance. Its beacon was dark. No ships had relied on it for years. Yet tonight, a faint blue glow pulsed from its highest window, matching the light hidden inside the crystal chip. Jimin stared at it without blinking. I've been here before. Jungkook nodded. Many times. I don't remember. You will. Hana untied the small boat from the dock, while Jungkook checked the fuel tank. It still works, he said quietly. It has too. They climbed aboard. The engine coughed twice before roaring to life. As the boat cut through the black water, the city lights slowly disappeared behind them. Only the lighthouse remained visible, growing larger with every passing minute. The baby slept peacefully in Hana's arms, but the silver key around his neck continued glowing brighter. Jimin couldn't take his eyes off the child. Who is he? Jungkook remained silent for a long time. Finally he answered. His name is Noah. Jimin smiled faintly. Noah? He was born 6 months ago. Who are his parents? Jungkook looked toward the sea. They were researchers. The Orion Foundation. Yes. What happened to them? They refused to hand Noah over. Silence settled across the boat. They were killed. Jimin closed his eyes. So Noah became the last surviving child. The last witness. Jungkook nodded. They believed certain children inherited extraordinary neurological patterns. They experimented on them. Yes. And Noah survived. Not only survived. Jungkook looked toward the sleeping infant. He remembers. What? Everything. Jimin frowned. He's only a baby. I know. But Noah recognizes faces. Impossible. He recognized you the moment you opened your front door. Jimin remembered the baby's tiny fingers wrapping around his thumb. He wasn't reaching for a stranger. Jungkook's voice softened. He was reaching for someone he'd already met. Before Jimin could ask another question, the boat suddenly lurched violently. The engine died. Darkness swallowed them. Hana looked over the side. What was that? Another impact shook the hull. Something enormous moved beneath the water. A deep metallic scraping sound echoed underneath the boat. Jungkook grabbed a flashlight. The beam illuminated only restless waves. Then, a diver emerged silently from the sea. Black mask. Silver circle on the shoulder. Then another. And another. Within seconds, nearly a dozen masked figures surrounded the boat. Floating effortlessly in the freezing water. They followed us, Hana whispered. No, Jungkook replied. They were waiting. One diver climbed onto the stern with astonishing speed. Jimin met him head-on. The attacker swung a knife. Jimin narrowly avoided the blade before striking him with an emergency flare gun. The man staggered backward into the sea. Another attacker landed on deck. Then a third. The tiny fishing boat became a battlefield. Jungkook fought despite his weakened condition, protecting Hana and Noah while forcing two attackers overboard. Jimin wrestled another masked figure near the bow. During the struggle, the attacker's mask cracked against the railing. It slipped away. Jimin froze. The face beneath it was young. No older than 20. Terrified. Not hateful. Brainwashed. The young man whispered weakly. I'm sorry. Before Jimin could respond, a sharp red dot appeared on the young man's forehead. Jungkook's eyes widened. Down. A suppressed gunshot echoed across the sea. The young man collapsed instantly. Blood spread across the deck. The bullet had come from somewhere inside the fog. Someone was eliminating their own people. The remaining divers disappeared beneath the water without hesitation. Silence returned. Only the waves continued striking the boat. Jimin knelt beside the dying attacker. The young man's trembling hand reached into his pocket. He removed a tiny folded photograph, then pressed it into Jimin's hand. Don't. He struggled to breathe. Let them. His voice faded forever. Jimin slowly unfolded the photograph. It showed the lighthouse. Standing in front of it were 3 people. Jimin, Jungkook, and a little girl about 5 years old. She smiled brightly while holding both of their hands. Jimin stared at the picture. His breathing stopped. He recognized the smile. He recognized the small paper flower tucked behind her ear. The same flower from his fragmented memories. His daughter. For the first time he saw her face clearly. Warm brown eyes. Soft black hair dancing in the wind. A tiny birthmark beneath her left eye. His hands began trembling uncontrollably. A memory exploded inside his mind. Daddy. She ran toward him across the lighthouse lawn. He lifted her high into the air. She laughed so hard that even Jungkook laughed beside them. Then another memory followed. Sirens. Smoke. Gunfire. Men in black uniforms surrounding the lighthouse. Someone shouting, "Take the child." Jimin fell to one knee as wave after wave of forgotten memories crashed into him. His entire body shook. Tears streamed freely down his face. I remember. Jungkook immediately knelt beside him. What do you remember? Jimin looked at the photograph. Then at Jungkook. His voice broke. We raised her together. Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. He slowly nodded. Yes. Jimin looked back at the little girl's smiling face. Every forgotten moment flooded back. Every birthday. Every bedtime story. Every promise. Every hug. Every fear. His daughter had never been a dream. She had been his entire world. And somewhere inside the lighthouse ahead, that world was waiting for him once again. Morning arrived over Crescent Island with a quiet beauty none of them had believed they would ever witness again. The first rays of sunlight washed over the old lighthouse, transforming its weathered stones into warm shades of gold. The endless sound of the ocean no longer carried fear, it carried peace. Jimin stood on the cliff overlooking the sea, his daughter beside him. She was no longer the little girl frozen inside his memories, yet every smile, every expression, every sparkle in her eyes reminded him of the child he had loved with all his heart. I used to come here every sunrise, she said softly. Jimin smiled. I know. She looked at him with gentle surprise. You remember. I remember everything now. She slipped her hand into his. I never stopped believing you would. Not far away, Jungkook quietly repaired one of the old wooden benches outside the lighthouse, while Noah crawled happily across the grass under Hana's watchful eyes. The baby laughed every time the seagulls circled overhead, filling the air with a joy that felt wonderfully ordinary after so many years of fear. The hidden laboratory beneath the lighthouse had already transmitted every encrypted file stored inside Noah's extraordinary memory. Governments around the world had received undeniable evidence of Project Orion's crimes. Secret facilities were shut down one after another. The remaining members of the organization disappeared into courtrooms instead of shadows, and countless families finally learned the truth about the loved ones who had vanished without explanation. The elderly man with silver eyes was never found. Some believed he escaped before the authorities arrived. Others believed he had prepared another identity long before Orion collapsed. Jimin no longer searched for him. Some mysteries deserved answers. Others deserved to end. Weeks passed. The lighthouse slowly became a home once again. Its broken windows were repaired. Its empty rooms filled with laughter instead of silence. The children's drawings remained exactly where they had been found, carefully framed along the hallway leading to the old underground chamber. They were no longer evidence of tragedy. They became reminders of resilience. One quiet evening, Jimin climbed to the top of the lighthouse with Jungkook. The sunset painted the horizon in brilliant shades of orange and violet. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Jimin broke the silence. I hated you. Jungkook nodded. I know. I tried to forget you. I know. I couldn't. Jungkook looked out toward the ocean. I never wanted forgiveness. Jimin smiled faintly. Good. Jungkook laughed quietly. Why? Because I wasn't planning to forgive you. Jungkook's smile faded. Before he could respond, Jimin continued. I was planning to thank you. Jungkook turned toward him, speechless. You carried everything alone for 7 years. I wasn't alone. You were. I carried the hope that one day you'd remember. Jimin looked toward the lighthouse beam sweeping peacefully across the sea. You protected my daughter. I promised I would. You protected me. I promised that too. Jimin reached into his pocket. From inside, he removed the old leather bracelet he had found beside the abandoned well. Carefully, he fastened it around Jungkook's wrist once more. It belongs with you. Jungkook stared at it. I thought I'd lost it forever. So did I. For the first time in years, there were no hidden messages. No mysterious letters. No unanswered questions. Only truth. Only forgiveness. Only family. Months later, the lighthouse officially reopened, not as a research station, but as a children's learning and recovery center overlooking the sea. Families from across the country visited the island, unaware of the extraordinary history hidden beneath its foundation. Children filled the once abandoned halls with laughter, painting stars on every wall exactly as Jimin's daughter had always imagined. Noah took his first steps across the same wooden floor where fear had once lived. Jimin's daughter knelt beside him, encouraging him with gentle laughter until he stumbled safely into Jungkook's waiting arms. The old lighthouse keeper's bell rang joyfully in the distance. Jimin watched the scene with quiet gratitude. Years ago, a baby's cry had arrived at his doorstep wrapped in mystery. He had believed it marked the beginning of another tragedy. Instead, it became the path that led him home. Sometimes destiny does not knock politely. Sometimes it arrives in the middle of a storm, carrying impossible questions, unbearable pain, and forgotten memories. But for those willing to open the door, even the darkest night can become the beginning of the brightest dawn. As evening settled over Crescent Island, the lighthouse beam stretched across the endless ocean one final time, guiding every lost soul toward the shore. And this time, everyone found their way home,